it's Nikki here. I'm here today to do my Book of the Month review for the Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde. It is the first book in a series. It is a really interesting mixture of sci-fi and fantasy, with smidges of alternative history in there, which I adore and don't read enough of despite how much I enjoy it. The book itself follows Thursday Next. She is our protagonist. She is a savvy literary crime investigator who specifically monitors literary-based crime, which I found really interesting. It deals a lot with like forgeries and finding manuscripts and people changing the stories and having copyright issues. Very odd, but very interesting, especially for someone who loves books as much as I do, and they reference a lot of classics that I have read, which was really awesome. This book specifically deals with the disappearance of Jane Eyre from the novel of the same title, and it is just about the investigation that Thursday Next goes with, as she kind of discovers who the villain is, what she needs to do to beat him, and kind of the entire world and how it responds to what's going on with the villain and some interesting new technologies. That's all I really have to say in summary. I'll move on to my likes and dislikes. I'm doing my usual 3 likes, 3 dislikes, starting with the likes as I love to do. The first like I have is that I loved the concept of the novel, the idea that literary crime was such a big thing and that characters could be like kidnapped right out of these books like we deal with here. I found it incredibly interesting, and just the idea just really nabbed me from the first chapter. My second like for this book is the role of alternate history. It was really interesting seeing how the world was different than ours. And then my third like is the pacing. I found it to be very consistent. I found it very good. Nothing ever felt rushed, but there was always something going on. The investigation was always moving forward in some aspect, and I really loved how it played out. Now I'm done with my likes, I'll move on to my dislikes. There's 3 of them. The first of which is that I didn't care for the world building. Although the world I found to be interesting, I didn't find it as well explained as I would have liked. There was a lot of potential that wasn't really capitalized on, and I know it's the first in a series, so I'm hoping the world building continues, but I just felt like there wasn't quite enough for me to really have a good grasp on what the world is that we're dealing with. My other dislike is the tidiness of the ending of the first novel. Just everything is just boxed up and presented with like a cute little bow. I don't begrudge good endings in books, but I would have liked maybe more of a cliffhanger or not as happy of an ending, I guess. Because of the character we're dealing with, I felt like the ending could have been done differently. My third dislike is the villain himself. Akron Hades, or Atron Hades, I'm not sure how you'd want to say it. I found him not to be the greatest villain. I understood his immediate goals, kind of his long-term goals were a little bit beyond me in terms of what the motivations really were. And I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I was kind of confused about what he wanted through a lot of the book. And that's all I have for dislikes. I'll move forward and talk about my characters now. Alright, so my characters that I'm going to talk about mostly are just Thursday and Akron Hades. And then I'll kind of do a brief summary about some of the side characters. Thursday I actually really enjoyed for the most part. There's a few things specifically in terms of like the love part of the plot that I didn't care for, but I really enjoyed her as a character otherwise. She was independent, she was strong, she was intelligent, she was incredibly capable, which I love seeing. She was good at her job and she had that mutual respect with her coworkers, which I really enjoyed seeing. And just overall, I found her reasonably intriguing, and she did a really good job at moving the plot forward by doing actual detective work. And then that's all I really have to say about her without being too spoilery. And I'll move on to Akron Hades now. And I didn't care for him, like I had mentioned in my dislikes. He had some very unclear motivations, which made it really hard for me to understand his long-term goals, which is unfortunate because I actually really liked the idea of his character, like the concept of it and the crimes he was committing, I found really interesting. it was just the motivations just didn't really jive with me, and I had problems following how far he wanted to go. The other thing that I found kind of odd about him is that he was overpowered, which isn't bad, but he was like conveniently not overpowered with the main character, and that kind of sucked because, like, yeah, she had to work harder to overcome him, but like he had certain things he could do that just didn't work on her, and it was very strange, like, as to why. Like, there was just no explanation as to why on either her end or his end, and it just really bugged me that he was so overpowered, but just conveniently not for her. And now I'll move on to call them the Spec Ops 27. This is the literary crimes division that Thursday Next works for. And I really enjoyed a lot of her co-workers. Like, you got the very the vibe you get when you see the stereotypical kind of like cop tropes in TV shows, but specifically done for literary crimes, so their knowledge was a little bit different, and it made it very interesting to read. But mostly I just loved the mutual respect that they had with Thursday Next, because she respected them to know what they were doing, and they respected her to know what she was doing, and they just did they had good interactions with her partner, and she had good interactions with her higher-ups because of that mutual respect, and I really, really enjoyed that part of the, being in the bullpen and dealing with the detectives. And now I'll move on to my wrap-up. Following this wrap-up, I'm going to do, as I have done the last few months, and do a kind of like spoiler section where I'm going to do some book club questions. I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler chat about a few things I want to talk about, a little bit more in depth. Overall, I found the book pretty interesting. There was I really enjoyed a lot of things about it, and I enjoyed it enough that I'm actually going to continue this series. I was in a used bookstore in another city, like on a road trip with some family, and I found the second and third books for this series, so I picked them up because they were a great price, and I enjoyed the first one enough that I wanted to continue the series because the protagonist especially had caught my interest. So for me, the first book was definitely interesting enough to continue. The protagonist I found really intriguing. She held my interest through the whole novel. The only issue I had, I'm hoping, is kind of dealt with or out of the way in the second book. I really liked the world, even though it could have done a bit more world building. The alternative history aspect of the world I found really, really intriguing, and it really caught my attention. The plot itself was really interesting, and it pulled me along with the character. The only thing I really didn't care for was the villain. Like I said, he was kind of meh. I found him just hard to follow, so hopefully that's not something that transfers over into the next villain, because I'm assuming there's going to be another one in the following books. And that all kind of sums up and leads me to give this book a 3.5 out of 5. I definitely enjoyed it, even if I wasn't over the moon about it. And the few things that I didn't care for in the book were enough to really kind of ratchet back that score. But overall, I enjoyed it. I'm going to give the rest of the books a try and see if I like them as well. That's all I have to say for those of you watching this spoiler-free section. Following this, I'll be moving into my spoiler section. So those of you who do not want to watch that part, click off the video now. And the others can continue on to the next sections. For those of you sticking around for the spoiler sections, I'm going to try to keep it kind of brief and concise. Not my forte, but we'll see how it goes. So I did my normal 6 book club questions that I like to do. First one being, what was your initial reaction to the book? My initial reaction was interest. I really liked Thursday's character, and I liked the first few interactions she had with Eyre and Hades, so I thought that the book was going to shape up really well in terms of the good versus evil. The second question is, what's your favorite chapter or scene? I really enjoyed the chapter where she was in Jane Eyre and she was kind of waiting out and trying to beat Eyre and Hades. I found her and Mr. Rochester joining forces to be very interesting. My third question is, how did the characters change throughout the book? In this book, they didn't really change. The time period over which the book takes place is pretty short, and the characters all had to serve a very specific purpose, so there wasn't a ton of growth. The fourth question is, how did you feel about the ending? This is kind of a split answer for me. On one hand, I really enjoyed how the villain was defeated and dealt with, and that entire final battle was very, very interesting to me. That being said, the ending of the love interest plot to me was kind of blech. it wasn't bad, I just didn't care for it, and just everything surrounding that whole love interest plot I didn't care for. My fifth question, would you read anything else by this author? This is a heck yes on my part. I say that because I enjoyed it enough that I really wanted to continue this series. I really enjoyed Thursday Next Character, and I picked up the other 2 books at a used bookstore on a recent trip, so I will be diving into those pretty soon. And then my 6th question is, does this book remind you of anything else? I haven't read too much else like this in terms of kind of like the oddity and sense of unreality while still tying closely to our reality would make me think a little bit of The Rivers of London by Ben Aronovich, which is the first book in that series. And otherwise, I don't really have anything that is the same level of kind of weird, but still pretty close to our own world. And that's all I have for book questions. I'll move on to my spoiler chat. I'm gonna talk about the big negative for me first, and that was the whole love interest plot with Landon. I really didn't care for it. And I didn't care for it because they tell you that 10 years has gone by since she broke up with him, and they're both still pining over each other. And it's just, to me, as someone who has had a long-term relationship and previously, I would have tried to get back on my feet and get over the relationship. Like, it just strikes me as very odd that they were both pining for each other so long and that nobody reached out in any capacity. It just, maybe I just don't understand because I've never been in a relationship that ends the way theirs does. Like, I don't know, I just didn't care for it, and it was kind of blech. Well, it was kind of meh to me. My other thing I want to talk about is I would have loved to see more of the literary crimes, because you deal with these huge ones because you have this like really overpowered villain kind of commanding everything. But I would have loved to see like, what are the more minor stuff? Like, what are the other minor literary crimes occurring, and like, how do you deal with them? I would have loved to see that stuff, because really, that's kind of what made me pick up the book, was that was a thing. And then my final thing I want to talk about is the alternate history. I really loved how it played out, and the fact that her dad kept like coming in and doing like a litmus test to see where reality was sitting and how our reality was compared to what he knows it to, or how their reality was compared to what he knows it to be. And I really liked that. And the thing that caught my attention the most with it was every one of those interactions always ended with me being, okay, there's something wrong, but is he trying to get it closer to our reality? Is that the true reality that they're trying to get to in the book? Or is there some other reality that he's working towards? And man, I found it really intriguing, and I hope that's explored in the later volumes. And that's all I really have to say. There wasn't too much in my spoiler tracks. There wasn't anything that I really got too ranty over, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.